Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo les va? Bueno, aquí estamos una vez más y ahora con una conferencia de prensa, una teleconferencia de prensa. ¿Cuál es la diferencia entre una conferencia de prensa y la teleconferencia? Bueno, que es telefónica. La conferencia, los conferencistas se sientan en un panel o en una mesa larga, vemos las imágenes, generalmente hay una cámara, bueno, acá no. Esto se hace vía telefónica, es muy común entre la prensa norteamericana de hacer este tipo de cosas, teleconferencias. Estamos acreditados como prensa, tenemos la posibilidad de hacer una pregunta. Vamos a poner ya, no nos está apareciendo nuestra cámara delantera, a ver, pero vamos con la trasera, ahí está. La NASA ya tiene su streaming abierto, no hay todavía audio, porque obviamente no empezó. En realidad el audio que vamos a poner es el audio telefónico, quizás la calidad de la señal de NASA no es la mejor, pero bueno, también se origina de teléfonos, así que en eso vamos a estar. Vuelvo de nuevo, ahora sí, a la cúpula de la estación espacial, ahí estoy. Paso como corresponde primero a saludar, primero a los miembros VIPs. El primero que veo es a Adrián Braga, que decía: muy buenas, ¿qué tal, Daniel? Espero recibir buenas noticias del SLS. Antonio, hello a todos, dice de Ibiza Bambán. Rosa Sierra, saludos de Tarragona y a todos los guardianes del espacio. Adrián Braga, nuevamente, bueno, se saludan entre ellos, ¿no? Álvaro Martín, como siempre, me encanta el mensaje este de Álvaro, siempre dice: comandante Daniel y pasajeros, ritual en proceso, saludar, dar like, aprender y disfrutar. Hoy toca trabajar y no podré ver el directo, pero lo veré en diferido más tarde. Gracias, no, gracias a ti, Álvaro, gracias al apoyo de todos los miembros VIP que hacen que sea posible esta actividad. Más cuando, digo, estamos retornando en parte a nuestra actividad comercial, entonces los horarios se hacen cada vez más complejos, pero no vamos a desaparecer. Nada nos va a quitar acá del medio, vamos a seguir. Vamos a poner un poquitito la música de fondo, que es la música de espera de la teleconferencia. Sigo con los saludos. Fernando Castañón dice: buen jueves a todos, ojalá nos den buenas noticias para el próximo lanzamiento del SLS y que no existan más atados. Me parece que el corrector jugó una mala pasada. Atrasos, es posible que sea. Nico Ron: ¿qué pasó con Starlink? ¿Atrasaron para mañana? Sí, yo quizás lo vi muy tarde, cuando el aviso ya estaba, cuando hicimos el streaming del desacople. Pero cuando terminamos y preparé todo, dije: me duermo una siesta y arrancamos. Bueno, ahí veo que el horario estaba cambiado, así que tuvimos que corregirlo. No me dio el tiempo para avisar en el directo. Y ahora sí. Marco dice también, lo anterior era Leonardo Becker, Enrique Bobadilla, que también saluda desde Acapulco, México. Bon Vespre desde la Pobla de Montornés, Tarragona, dice Jaume Fuset, gracias por estar allí. Desde Toronto, Canadá, escribía Leonardo Becker, gracias. Miguel Ángel te dice: ¿será que van a dar buenas noticias? Bueno, yo escribí hace unos minutitos en el chat. En realidad, las noticias que ya sabemos que son, porque aparte está en el comunicado de prensa, dice, lo voy a leer, vamos a ver, voy a ir sobre el comunicado de prensa. La agencia dice, voy a bajar un poquitito más la música, creo que está un poquitito alta, ¿no? Quiero escuchar cuando empiece también para no perdérmelo. Dice: la agencia planifica un nuevo intento de ensayo húmedo general, o sea, el Wet Dress Rehearsal, como se dice en inglés, a principios de junio, para demostrar la habilidad de cargar propelente a los tanques del cohete y conducir el conteo, la cuenta regresiva final para un lanzamiento, en preparación para el lanzamiento de Artemis I este verano. Bueno, hasta ahí es lo que dicen. ¿Quiénes son los participantes de esta conferencia o esta teleconferencia? Jim Free, que es el administrador asociado del Directorado de Desarrollo de Exploración y Sistemas de NASA Headquarters, y Cliff Lanahan. Cliff Lanahan es gerente de operaciones senior de vehículo y es parte de lo que es NASA Sistemas de Tierra, que son quienes operan la parte de la grúa digo, que lleva el cohete desde el edificio de integración y toda la parte que tiene que ver con los sistemas de administración de combustible, gases y todo lo demás. Empezó.
NASA's SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft arrived back at Kennedy's Vehicle Assembly Building April 26th after a 10-hour journey from the launch pad 39B. Since their arrival, teams have worked to make repairs and perform additional checkouts while the spaceport.
Recuerden que voy a traducir quizás alguna cosa, pero quiero participar, entonces voy a estar escuchando más que nada y luego en todo caso hacemos un resumen cuando esté terminando. Y recuerden que si tienen alguna pregunta interesante la escriben en el chat con la palabra pregunta en mayúscula y si lo pueden poner en inglés, mejor, si no, no importa.
After brief opening comments from each of our speakers, we'll take your questions. You can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when we're ready and close your mic after you ask the question. We ask that you please stick to one question and identify to whom your question is directed. And shortly after we conclude, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference online. So first, we will hear from Jim Free. Jim?
Great. Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody.
After the tone, please state your name.
Daniel Riguera.
Thank you.
About where things are at. I'm usually not the type to shy away from giving the folks that really do.
Eso que escuchaban es que me acabo de acreditar para hacer preguntas. O sea, acabo de solicitar la palabra.
Today, but looks like Cliff drew the short straw and is here with me today to answer the tough question.
Quien está hablando es Jim Free.
So let's first talk about rolling back. Rolling back to the VAB was absolutely the right thing to do to really work through several issues that we found at the pad, as well as to let our partners at Air Liquide do the work they need to do on the repairs for the nitrogen. And I'll remind everybody, we have a clean pad philosophy on this program and with KSC, so that really limits some of the access we have out at the pad. So yet another reason that we decided to roll back. The repairs at Air Liquide are progressing on track and currently scheduled to complete and do our verification soon, which will be to the actual conditions for both wet dress and launch, probably around the May 11th timeframe. Our United Launch Alliance partner did replace the check valve over the weekend, and we inspected the valve and did find a small piece of rubber that was preventing this check valve from sealing correctly, and we are looking at the sources that debris could have come from. We didn't see any issues at all with the valve, which is really good news, and Cliff can talk more about some of the additional testing that we're doing. On the hydrogen leak that we saw when we went from slow to fast fill during the last wet dress, we've narrowed that down to a couple causes, and Cliff and his team are continuing to work through those this week, and I know he'll talk about how that works.
La válvula superior, dice, ya fue reparado el tema, y la pérdida de hidrógeno en la base de soporte, están trabajando en eso.
Work through things and that schedule when we can get back out to the pad. And we're looking right now at that next wet dress in the early to mid-June timeframe. We may update that as the other work progresses. Some of these things are a constraint to roll back out, so we need to look at how that work goes, and certainly we'll continue to keep you updated on that work and the schedule. I'm sure you heard the administrator and associate administrator mention the possibility of that that August Artemis I launch during their Crew 4 news conference last week. And as we've been saying, we'll set that official launch date after we get through wet dress. But, you know, based on some of the historical challenges from similar programs over the years and the schedule performance that we've seen thus far, we are looking at a couple launch periods through the August timeframe. That schedule has margin in it in the work that we do, and also
Agosto,
to
la fecha de
allow us to
lanzamiento
do
probable.
2 wet dress rehearsal attempts if we need them. We are optimistic that we only need one more based on everything we've been able to do thus far to fine-tune our tanking procedures. But we also want to be realistic and upfront with you that it may take more than one attempt to get the procedures where we need them for a smoother launch count that gives us the best chance to making our launch windows when we get to the launch day. You know, Tom Whitmire in the past has talked about the intricate choreography of all the variables involved with tanking a new rocket for the first time, and I know Charlie Blackwell Thompson and Mike Serafin have talked a bit about how activities compare with programs like the Space Shuttle and Saturn V. So I want to share a few of the historical facts that folks have pulled together. You know, for Apollo, there was a test vehicle that was used to do wet dress and ring out the systems, both flight and ground. That was out at the pad with multiple wet dress rehearsals for about 5 months. Apollo 4 rolled out to the pad in August of '67 and did a countdown demonstration test. Did an initial tanking in early October and finally completed the test in mid-October and launched in early November. For the shuttle, it rolled out to the first pad at the end of December in 1980 and did separate hydrogen and oxygen tanking in late January, and a countdown demonstration test in mid-February with a flight readiness firing all the way on the 20th of February. They also conducted a tanking test in late March, ran into a few issues, and did another attempt in late March as well. That next tanking was for launch, and after a scrub on April 10th, finally launched April 12th. So you get a sense that with the shuttle, in this case being at the pad like 3.5 months, and the time the Apollo test vehicle was at the launch pad, it is a challenge to work these new systems and these complicated vehicles. So, you know, we certainly own where our program is, but I think we're in family of where we've been in the past. So with that, let me turn it over to Cliff to let you know about the work that is happening in the VAB today and what we're going to do to get back to the pad to move us forward.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. So the Space Launch System rocket with the Orion spacecraft arrived back at the Vehicle Assembly Building on April 26th, as was mentioned. And then our teams really got to work, and we've done a lot of work to get the rocket ready to roll back out to the launch pad. So far, we've replaced the faulty helium check valve that was located on the interim cryopropulsion stage. That's the second stage. And as Jim mentioned,
Quien está hablando ahora es Cliff Lahan, que es el administrador de operaciones senior de vehículos de NASA Exploration Ground System, o sea, toda la parte de tierra que tiene que ver con el wet dress rehearsal.
And get the clearance to go ahead and hook everything back up and test. For the most part, the hardware is about, I would say, 80% installed, and we're looking to finish up the installation of the hardware.
Héctor González, ya me quedé dormido. Estoy escuchando, no han agregado nada hasta ahora más que hacer un recuento. Jim Free hizo un recuento de las veces que las misiones Apolo y Shuttle, o sea, transbordador espacial y demás, se han demorado con estos wet dress rehearsals, o sea, con estos ensayos generales.
And again, that umbilical is located on the mobile launcher and connected to the core stage of the rocket. So we've conducted leak checks on all the joints in that area, and what we've determined is that the compression on the gasket, basically that's between the flanges of the fill line, we're relaxing, which
Una pregunta que quiero hacerle ahora a todos ustedes que están escuchando es si notan cambios en el audio. ¿Cómo está mi audio, no el que estamos escuchando, sino el mío, comparado con lo que venía haciendo en las transmisiones anteriores?
lesson
Espero en el
learned
chat.
that we've incorporated, and so they have been torquing, and right as of this time, the hydrogen TSMU is complete, and we also went ahead and looked at similar designs on the other umbilicals. So the core stage intertank umbilical, as well as the oxygen tail service mass umbilical, have a very similar design. So we went ahead and we've also retorqued those arms. As of now, we haven't detected any leaks, but again, that's not uncommon when trying to detect leaks at air temperature instead of the super cold temperatures of the cryogenics when we load at the launch pad. But again, we feel we've done what we can do at this point. The next test will be when we flow cryos out at the launch pad. We've also performed some other closeout work on areas of the rocket that we would need to do in any case, and we've been doing work to try and avoid any kind of interference with our main effort, which was to fix the issues we had that constrained wet dress rehearsal and get back out to the pad as quickly as possible. So, but we have been able to accomplish other work in parallel. So that's been a great effort by the team. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the gaseous nitrogen supplier, Air Liquide, that supplies us nitrogen, has been upgrading its facility to meet our requirements for our next wet dress rehearsal. And as of now, as Jim mentioned, they're on target for a May 9th completion of their effort of the mods and their testing, and then there will be a extended test performed to make sure it meets the SLS and Orion requirements that we'll need for WDR, wet dress rehearsal, as well as launch. So once we complete all this major work, we'll retract all our working platforms inside the VAB, close out the volumes in the vehicle that we had to go into when we came back to the
Bueno, dice que evidentemente no es que sea de esperar, pero podría llegar a pasar de que haya algunas pérdidas. Dice que ya han chequeado, pero a veces no se puede chequear en condiciones similares a la que va a estar el cohete en el sitio de lanzamiento. Pero esperan no tener más problemas, por lo menos en lo que han revisado.
Thank you, Cliff. I will now begin the question and answer portion. Please stick to one question and identify to whom it is directed. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask the second question. Again, you can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can enter *2 if you'd like to be removed from the queue. Our first question will be from Marcia Dunn of the Associated Press.
Associated Press, la primera pregunta.
Yes, hello.
Marcia.
I'm wondering, what are the launch windows in August?
Las ventanas de lanzamiento en agosto, ¿cuándo son? Atentos. ¿Y cuándo tiene que ser el ensayo para poder llegar a lanzar en
Marcia,
agosto?
first let me answer the second half of your question. We have very clear objectives that we need to work through for the wet dress. We worked through a number of those. I think Charlie has indicated some of that in the past of what we've been able to do. We need to get the vehicle tanked and get to a replenish mode. So from my perspective, when we get through that, then we'll be ready to say, wet dress is.
No está contestando.
As far as windows, we do have our launch period 24 is the early part of August. We do have to make sure we work with the range on any of these, by the way, and particularly one of those is the Psyche mission in there, which has a pretty clear launch window. And then launch period 25 begins towards the end on August 23rd. So those are the two in August. 24 starts in July, but those are the early August and late August timeframes for launch periods 24 and 25.
Fines de agosto, 24 y 25. A ver qué pregunta CBS.
Thank you very much, Bill Harwood. For Jim, I'm curious when you think the export control issue will be resolved. I mean, you've had an SLS countdown in one form or another for many, many months, if not years. And so I think it's a little hard for some of us to understand why we can't get more details at this point, or why PAO isn't allowed to provide real-time coverage from the firing room given the time that's passed. I mean, just as a point of reference, NASA used to hand out shuttle countdown bar charts before each flight, and it's pretty hard to understand why one was okay and this one isn't, especially given it's the same engines and essentially the same cryo system. So I'm just curious when this might get resolved because it's hard for us to
Dice,
understand.
¿cuándo van a resolver esto de los sistemas de...
Yeah, thanks,
justamente
Bill.
tienen el mismo tipo de
I probably should
criogénico?
move a little further away from Catherine before I answer this question. Certainly, we've heard your and others' concerns about the launch count and what we can share. I can tell you that for wet dress, we're actually using those as our test case as to how the team uses the loops. I think you remember from shuttle, the launch director loop and the NASA test director loop, and then we had anomaly loops that never made their way out for shuttle. So we're trying to use wet dress to say, first of all, we need to get further into the count than we've been able to get thus far to understand everything that comes across the loops. We're having our PAO folks participate in the wet dress. We're recording those so we can kind of go back and say, what can we really make available for launch? We're looking at historical launches, shuttle, other government launches as to what's out there. And we're looking at what can we have from a commentary perspective over the parts where the export control folks are worried about what might be shared. So I can tell you that as recent as, I can't remember now, the rigs run together yesterday or today, I shared a couple links to some launch commentary with folks so we can really understand what we can and can't share, and we'll work closely with the export control folks. But I certainly understand your concern and the history there, Bill, and want to tell you that we're working to give the best coverage we can when it comes time for launch.
Thank you. Our next question is from Philip Sloss of NASA Spaceflight.
NASA Spaceflight va a preguntar ahora. Y no le respondieron mucho, dice que le preocupa mucho.
I think this is for Cliff. I believe that I'd heard that there were gaskets on either side of the debris plate on that flange connection. This is regarding the hydrogen leak. Was it one of those gaskets or both of them? And was this flange connection serviced or rechecked after the umbilical retract release test back in September? Thanks.
Está hablando de unos sellos que hay a cada lado donde están las
There are
pérdidas.
two gaskets. They're called fluorogreen gaskets. I believe that's the manufacturer's name for those gaskets. And yes, they were torqued prior to the umbilical release and retract test. Unfortunately, however, they were not re-torqued prior to rolling out for WDR. So it's a good lesson learned for us. Our engineering community has been really working this very hard, and basically has determined that any cryo flows from now on, we will basically be getting back in there and retorquing these bolts each time. So you are correct in saying that they were not retorqued after URRT, but again, lesson learned, and the community is going to school on that, and we do plan to retorque after each cryo flow.
Thank you.
Bueno,
Our
tampoco
next
nada.
question is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Eric Berger de Ars Technica. Pregunta.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the update on this. Question for Jim Free. This week, the administrator said cost-plus contracts were, and I quote, a plague on NASA.
Está hablando del tema de los costos. Son un problema, o sea, los costos adicionales.
But can you talk a little bit about whether future exploration systems contracts are going to be awarded in fixed price, given sort of this change in attitude? Thanks.
Sí, los cambios de actitud estos cómo va a afectar a los próximos lanzamientos.
When we look at our acquisition process, we really try and balance the risk of what we're trying to buy and its maturity versus what acquisition strategies
cuando compramos algo, tratamos de balancear los riesgos que hay cuando la tecnología está madura o no.
With landers.
Es lo que tratamos de hacer con los aterrizadores, por ejemplo,
¿no? And then when we pick it, it's our job as NASA to manage our contractors, regardless of the type that we have, and in some cases manage ourselves too. Right, in fixed price contracts, we can't be coming in with all kinds of changes because that drives up costs. And then
algunas veces entrar en contratos fijos dice no nos permite cambiar cosas en el camino. Entonces lo vemos en base
we have some recent examples where we've for high dollar value and critical systems like landers, like spacesuits, where we've actually used fixed price. Does that mean we'll never use cost plus again? No, it doesn't. It's let's go back and look at what we're buying and make the best choice that minimizes the risk to the government.
Thank you. Our next question is from Emery Kelly of Florida Today.
Hey, folks. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. Just, I think this might be a question for Cliff. I'm just trying to get a little bit more of a mental visualization, I guess, of what's going on at Air Liquide.
Si quiero tener una visualización sobre qué es lo que pasa con Air Liquide, o sea, el proveedor que tuvieron problemas.
Launches, are they a little bit overwhelmed? I mean, where does this kind of stand on their priority list? I would assume it's at the top, if not toward the top, but I'm just trying to get a little bit more on what they're working over at that plant. Thanks.
Yeah, and Emery, what I'd say is, there's been our system, the SLS has a larger demand than because of the size of the vehicle. So there's been workarounds as Air Liquide has taken their system down to continue to provide nitrogen for the whole center. And I would say this is at the top of their priority list. I think somebody said
Están hablando sobre el tema de Air Liquide, que fue quien tuvo el problema con el suministro de nitrógeno que pasan a través de cañerías, que están trabajando, pero que la prioridad principal de Air Liquide es proveerle al SLS, y que están trabajando con ellos.
I think it's high at their priority list. There's been nitrogen supplied for the ongoing operations and launches there that will continue to go on. These changes really help us with the large.
Me río del comentario de Adrián Carlos.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jeff Faust at Space News.
Cliff, I just want some clarity on the check valve. The piece of rubber, that's not from the valve itself. It's from some external source, or is that debris something wrong with the valve itself that came loose?
El problema de la válvula, que expliquen cuál era el problema de la válvula. Si es el problema con algo externo.
From external source, but Cliff, do you want to elaborate?
Sure, Jim. Yeah, so they're still investigating that, but
estamos investigando todavía.
Basically, what they're finding, it was found in the ground side of the quick disconnect, where you separate the vehicle from the umbilical arm. And right now, they're still investigating what could be the source of that piece of rubber. And,
están investigando cuál puede ser la fuente de ese pedazo de goma que se encontró en el momento en que se desconectó el vehículo de los cables umbilicales de tierra.
When we talk about the contamination that we've seen in the check valve and all, they're trying to match up whether this was the source of the contamination particles that we see further upstream.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark of Spaceflight Now.
Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. Ya a esta altura creo que no nos va a tocar. Vamos a ver.
I think we may have lost Stephen. Let's see. Can we go to Irene Kloss of Aviation Week?
Aviation Week.
Thanks, Catherine. Good afternoon. I have two questions. The first for Cliff. Do you know when this debris was introduced into the helium check valve? In other words, was there a time in processing where the valve was cycled? And
hablando ahora de la basura, de la válvula, de cuándo puede haber sido introducida.
Turned up later. And for Jim, following on Bill's comments and questions, is it your intention to provide live commentary for the next wet dress?
Yeah, Cliff, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I believe it was WDR3. I have to go confirm exactly, but there was a point at which we were trying to pressurize the COPV tanks on the vehicle. That basically provides the helium. The tanks hold the helium that then operate your pneumatic valves and pressurized tanks. So when we were trying to pressurize those, we realized that we weren't getting the pressures we needed to fully pressurize the tanks, and that was the first indication that we had a problem, that we weren't getting enough flow into those tanks. And from there, the investigation started, and basically the result of that was, as we were headed into WDR3, the decision was made that we would not tank the second stage because of this problem, and just tank the first stage.
Estaba obstruida la válvula,
And
obviamente.
at that point,
¿no?
once we
Cuando
knew
se dieron
we were
cuenta de que
coming
el
back to
flujo no era
the
suficiente y
VAB,
decidieron no
the decision
cargar
was
ya la
made that we
segunda
would go
parte.
ahead and remove and replace that check valve at that point, so we could do a full WDR once we roll back out.
And Irene, to the second half of your question, for wet dress, we are going to have live commentary.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from Mike Wall of Space.com.
Bueno, dice que lo bueno es que para el próximo ensayo va a haber comentario en vivo, lo cual esa era mi pregunta. Si tienen alguna pregunta ahora, bárbaro, háganla ahora así la transmito.
That's interesting or that kind of raised concerns, or is it just these same two issues that kind of cropped up on the pad that have gotten all of your attention?
So what I would say is there's nothing that popped up that is like, wow, that also occurred. Some of the other items that we've been working, we have what we call our kind of our major nonconformances that we knew we needed to work. We've been looking at some areas on the ICPS aft plate purge. Umbilical, we did have some during the WDR, some air intrusion on that boot. So we've been reseating that boot and working that. We did have an area with a GPS tracker inside the ICPS that we feel was a mobile launcher connection. So in other words, from the antenna on the mobile launcher, we weren't getting the signal back into the second stage. And we've been working that problem, and we think we got that resolved, but we need to do a retest here when we power up late this week or early next week. And then in general, we've been, like I said, there's other work we've been doing to try to reduce the amount of work we'll have to do after we come back from the next wet dress rehearsal. There was some TPS foam areas on the core stage that we're fixing. So there's other things that we're doing, again, just trying to get as much work behind us as we can, but we're not letting them become schedule drivers to getting to the next wet dress rehearsal.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jim Siegel of NASA Tech.
Thank you for taking my question, and good luck in all the repairs that you're doing. I have a question about how many other SLS rockets and Orion capsules are in the system. In other words, how many are going to be built, and how will the construction or the work that's being done on those how will that be affected by what's going on here now in what you're doing after this last dress rehearsal? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we actually have the Artemis II capsule and service module at Kennedy right now and undergoing testing. I think the first power on for those is right now targeted at the end of May. The Artemis III crew module is pressure shell is down at Kennedy, getting outfitted and undergoing testing as well, along with the European service module is over in Bremen, Germany. So those three are ongoing. Some of the early parts for the next crew module are underway. So I've said it publicly. It's great. We have a hardware-rich program right now in terms of what we have in the queue. And your question about how will what's going on now affect it? This is a test flight that we have with Artemis I. The reason we're doing this test flight is we need to understand how the hardware works, but also how it comes together. Cliff and his team who processed this vehicle and the Orion and SLS teams that have watched their vehicles go through processing have a lot of lessons learned that we want to incorporate for the next vehicles to increase that processing time to a point that fits our model, that gets it to a point that we expect, right? We want to be as efficient as we can to get that increase is more around our flight rate up. And we're going to learn a lot on this mission that then we might need to make a change.
Están hablando de aumentar las
and,
frecuencias de lanzamiento, que están
Artemis
aprendiendo
1 and
mucho,
2.
en fin. Digo,
So, getting to a good flight rate
dice traducir, por
from our
favor.
lessons
No,
learned is something we should do between
Junior
Artemis
Vélez,
1 and
lee la
2,
descripción del video.
2 and 3, and 3 and 4. So the effect is tremendous because we will have processed the vehicle.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcia Smith of Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much. My question is for Jim, and it has to do with the new mobile launcher that you're building. Administrator Nelson was very critical of Bechtel and their work on that one. Can you give us an
Están
update
haciendo un
on
nuevo
the schedule
vehículo
for the new one?
de
And are you
mobile
learning
launcher, o sea,
anything from the
que lleva el
exercise with
cohete.
the current mobile launcher with the wet dress rehearsal that can be applied to that one? For example, on these hydrogen umbilicals, is there some new way of designing them so you don't have to have this retorquing issue on the new mobile launcher?
Sí, con el nuevo vehículo
Thanks, Marcia.
lanzador, dice, se
So
solucionan esos
I'll
problemas
start
del
with the
hidrógeno.
back
y
end.
demás.
You know, the retorquing is part of the design because we have soft goods in there, right? And soft goods behave the way soft goods behave.
Dice, el retorquing es parte
I think what
del trabajo que hay que hacer, dice, porque hay juntas. El retorquing es reapretar las tuercas. Y está hablando en caso de las conexiones.
Question, we'll continue to learn from it, and we'll do that. As far as ML2, we work closely with Bechtel all the way up their management chain to continue to get our path and schedule forward on ML2. I wish I could describe to you the priority for me, other than to say that I talk ML2, say, at least once a day, and where we're going. We're working with Bechtel to get a
Estamos trabajando en lo del tema del ML.
update
¿no? O sea,
to their
Launcher 2.
cost and schedule in the late May timeframe, which we're trying to get through our final design, the complexity of this design, and
Estamos tratando de tener el diseño final
system
de
that
algo tan
has
complejo.
modes that are induced by the vehicle is incredibly complex. We're looking in the latter part of the summer to finalize the design.
El diseño va a estar terminado del lanzador móvil del vehículo número 2 para el final del verano.
Word back from our contractor is the end of May. I will tell you that the team down at Kennedy, led by Daryl Foster, is working every day with Bechtel to drive out the technical issues that remain to get us on a path to have Artemis 4 in a reasonable time frame. But you know, that schedule we have to get from them at the end of May. But I'll tell you, it is a high priority all the way up through, as you noted, right? The administrator is able to talk about it at the hearing, so he is on top of it as well. But it's a big concern for us.
Thank you. Our next question is from George Borski of Gizmodo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for doing this. Jim, you mentioned during your opening comments that you wanted to be realistic and upfront in terms of the upcoming wet dress, indicating that it actually may take more than one attempt to perform this. Now, this, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time I'm hearing this kind of language, that previously the understanding was that it was just going to be this one attempt and then you would set it all up and we'd have the Artemis I mission underway. I'm wondering, is SLS proving to be a more complicated beast than you guys had assumed? Is this more, are you finding these problems to be unexpected? And I'm wondering, or perhaps is this just a communications issue, and that there always was this potential? I mean, I do recall you gave us a bit of a history lesson when it came to the shuttle program, but again, this is the first I'm hearing that that there will have to be perhaps a multiple wet dress. And a second question, having to do with the various stages. Charlie Blackwell Thompson at a previous media teleconference outlined 3 different possible scenarios for the subsequent wet dress. I'm assuming that with the June wet dress and then an August launch that you will roll this thing back to the VAB, but I wouldn't mind having just some confirmation on that, on the steps that will happen following a subsequent successful wet dress. Sorry for my long-winded questions, but I look forward to your responses.
Wow.
Sure, George. So I'll start with the second question. We will roll back again before launch. We had
la segunda pregunta
the 3
dice,
options,
vamos a llevar el vehículo de nuevo después del nuevo ensayo.
Our decision was to do the minimum that we needed to do to get back out to the pad as
La
soon as
decisión era llevar las menos veces posible el vehículo al sitio de lanzamiento y atrás al edificio.
We have some work that we've deferred to the other side of wet dress, and then we have our final preps for launch, which include some of the flight termination system testing and installations and work with the range. So we will roll back again. As to your first question, you know, I wouldn't say that SLS is more complicated. We knew it was complicated. Certainly the check valve was something we didn't anticipate. It doesn't have anything to do with complexity. It's an issue that happened. I think some of the things we've seen about how we load locks and the interactions on the ground is something we didn't expect. But I will tell you that when we were able to start moving locks on both the second and third attempt, the team really understood the issue about the column of the hot locks flowing down from the ICPS and affecting how we were loading into the core stage. They understood that, I'd say, nearly immediately, and then came up with a fix. They talked about it, and then we implemented it. So I think it's one of those things that we iterate on. We're trying to be,
Está hablando del tema de las fallas, de que tuvieron de las válvulas y cómo lo han solucionado y cómo siguen adelante con el tema. Y que ya sabían que este vehículo es complejo y saben que es realmente complejo.
We're trying to make sure that you know that, understand why we think that, because of what we've seen.
Creo que es de las cosas más complejas que alguna vez he hecho.
And I think you'll continue to hear from us that that level of realism and approach, because I think the team has had it before, but also they need our support. And I say our, I mean those of us that sit here at headquarters to say, hey, let's get this right and get an optimistic schedule, so that we're sharing that with our stakeholders, of which you are all included in that, and also that we're managing the workload on this team, which has been going at it at a pretty high level for quite a while now.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ken Kramer of Facebook Close.
Oh, hi. Thank you for doing this and taking my question, and good luck with everything in the future. My question, I think, is for Cliff about the gaseous nitrogen work with Air Liquide. I'm wondering, since this impacted 2 of your wet dress rehearsals, if you might be verifying that this system is fully operational and able to
sobre el tema del nitrógeno, del problema que tuvieron, dice, ya van 2 veces que tienen, dice, y se han hecho los chequeos.
During the countdown. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We will be doing testing, verification, validation testing of the upgrades to the system.
Vamos a hacer un chequeo de verificación de la mejora del sistema de nitrógeno con Air Liquide.
Our team has worked with Air Liquide and our facility management director here to develop test procedures that will allow us to exercise the system in a way that'll basically stress it more than we would expect during our WDR and launch campaigns. So when I say that, what I'm talking about is they've added margin to ensure the flow rates can be met. The test will actually run for 32 hours and that's about a 10% margin over what we would expect to
Bueno,
need during the actual launch
esa puede ser
campaign.
una buena excusa,
So,
Antonio.
yes, we will be testing. The
Elisa
team's
Bambán
been
dice
very
que
involved
la
with
próxima excusa es que la luna no esté
in
en la posición
developing that
correcta.
test plan, and we will be flowing nitrogen all the way out to the pad. Obviously, we will not have a vehicle there and a mobile launcher, but we'll basically put dampers out at the interface to the mobile launcher and be able to adjust and regulate to ensure we're getting the back pressures that the mobile launcher and vehicle would put on the system, again, in an effort to make sure we're stressing the system to meet our needs.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark of Spaceflight Now.
Stephen Clark de Spaceflight
Hey,
Now.
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Sorry for that glitch earlier. Just wanted to follow up on an earlier question from Irene. I think Jim Free mentioned there will be commentary for the next WDR. Will this be like on NASA TV, or are you talking about the Twitter updates that we saw for the previous WDR attempt?
¿Cómo vamos a tener los
And also,
updates? Dice
what's the
las
target
noticias.
date that you're looking at for returning the SLS to 39B? Thanks.
Stephen, I can answer the question
¿Y qué
about
fecha
the
lo van a llevar
commentary.
al
Right
sitio de
now, we're looking
lanzamiento?
at having that on the YouTube stream, but we're still working through those details. So we'll make sure to share that with you all when we've worked all those plans out.
And then based on the schedule going back out to the pad, it's, Cliff mentioned the work that we have and the things we need to understand about, especially about the check valve, and then the getting the nitrogen system up and running and tested. So that puts us probably in the late May timeframe for rolling out and a wet dress in early June. It's about, Cliff, correct me, like 12 to 14 days once we get out to the pad before we can do a wet dress.
You're correct, Jim.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Daniel Reguera from our Drone UI.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muchas gracias. Thank you for taking my question. We have a really great, large audience in Spanish. You told that the next days, probably dates for the launch will be in August. If during the August window it is not possible to launch, when would be the next opportunity?
Yeah, so we have launch periods, planned for the entire rest of the year based on our conditions, which I'll remind everybody, our conditions for when we launch is that we have a daylight landing, which drives our when we launch, and our and the orbital mechanics drive it as well, but it's driven by when we launch so that we can land in the daylight. But we have launch periods planned, through the end of the year.
Okay, is it possible to have a live audio or control mission?
Hi, and thank you for taking my question.
Okay, no entró la segunda. Tenía que haberla hecho las dos juntas. Bueno, dijeron que tenían fechas durante todo el año para poder lanzar, que depende de la órbita, para poder aterrizar durante el día.
The most unexpected?
Yes, that's right.
Y de la mecánica de órbitas con la Luna, obviamente.
I would say probably the interactions between the ground and the flight system, and learning how that interaction drove us to change our plans. The example I gave earlier about the LOX loading would be my take. I'll let Cliff weigh in here too.
Well, I guess I would agree with that.
Bueno, me acabo de poner en silencio para ellos, para que no me escuchen, porque posiblemente si no escuchan lo que estoy diciendo. Fernando Castaño decía, estaba muy atento a lo que decían, porque tampoco quería repetir preguntas que ya hubieran hecho
Not
antes.
anticipating, but again, we were able to quickly, what I feel, diagnose that, and hopefully got that resolved, and we'll find out during the next WDR. And I would say the check valve is turning out to be a little more. Again, it's not, during the testing, we had a way to continue with testing, but that's turning out that finding that root cause is turning into a little more of a challenge for us.
Sí, lo que quieren es tener un aterrizaje diurno, dice, ¿no? Y obviamente dice que las mecánicas de orbitales le permiten tener lanzamientos de aquí hasta fin de año siempre. Obviamente también dependen del resto de los lanzamientos que están previstos allí, ¿no?
You just mentioned that we do have launch windows beyond
Manuel
August.
Masanti está preguntando.
We used to have the information from May, June, and July with the specific dates. And I understand we have a July 26th, August 9th, which I'm assuming would be the last day of the early August. Then you mentioned August 24th, August 25th. That window is only 2 days, or it extends until the end of August. And I wonder if we can have precise dates towards the end of the year. Thank you.
Sure. So,
bien, Manuel. Le pidió ahora fechas precisas.
August 23rd. That launch period runs through August 29th. So it's multiple. I'm sorry, it runs to August 29th, and then we have a break in 25, launch period 25, that then picks up on September 2nd and ends September 6th. I think Catherine Hamilton's going to follow up on the remaining launch periods with you.
Yep, you can reach out to me by email, and I'll provide more details on that. And so that's all the time that we have for questions. Jim, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Sure. First, thank you all for your time today, and as I mentioned, for your interest. This is really hard work, and I would say that regardless of where you sit when you roll a launch vehicle out for the first time, it's difficult, but it's also really rewarding. And for me, coming back to the agency, it's really cool to be part of this team and this program and be there to watch them work. The challenges we've encountered that we've talked here, other than the check valve, have really been not associated with the Orion spacecraft and SLS, and that's really remarkable for a new system. The challenges have been, as we just talked about, operating the new ground systems for the first time, how the two interact. We've found a way to address them. We've achieved some of our wet dress objectives already, and that's attributed to the problem-solving skills that our NASA and jointly with our contractors, their problem-solving skills. And we have a plan for the future with some margin built in with the wet dress multiple attempts. We know what we have to accomplish both in the VAB that Cliff and his team will do on this pit stop, and Charlie knows what she needs to do when we get out to the pad, and that's the path that we're on. And we want to make sure you understand those issues. We want you to know that we're going to continue to communicate with you the way the team has to date and what we've tried to do here today. And sharing our story is incredibly important. And I hope you see that we're trying to do that. This news about the live commentary hopefully starts to help some of the concerns there. I know it doesn't take them all the way, but I assure you, as I mentioned, that we'll continue to attack it. And look forward to talking to you all in the future, hopefully on the other side of a positive wet dress test.
Thank you all for joining us
Bueno,
today.
no han agregado mucho más. Vamos a cortar un poquito esta llamada. Así, bueno, ahí acabamos de cortar. Agregamos un poquito de nuestra música para alegrar un poquito esto, porque la verdad que ha sido bastante monótono, y hablan mucho y a veces dicen un poco menos de lo que todos esperamos, ¿no? Es más, vamos a poner lo de las últimas preguntas. La pregunta de Manuel Masanti estuvo muy buena porque cayó sobre lo mío, ¿no? O sea, estuvo genial, la verdad que me encantó. Voy a aprovechar a mandarle un mensaje de texto a Manuel, justamente por eso. Porque en realidad lo que hice ahora, no estaba comentando en el último momento, era justamente les mandé un mail diciéndoles, porque le van a Manuel Masanti le van a comentar, le van a contestar lo que preguntó, o sea, la ampliación de fechas lo van a contestar por correo, le dijeron. Yo pedí ahora con un mail de que también me hagan esa ampliación, que me la manden a mí también. En realidad, lo interesante de esto es que tienen las primeras fechas previstas para poder hacer el ensayo van a ser ahora los primeros días de junio, no hay vuelta, porque recién esperan llevarlo dentro de 12 o 14 días, o sea, sobre finales de mayo. Eso da de que la fecha probable del lanzamiento recién sea del 23 al 29 de agosto. La pregunta que hizo Fernando Castañón estuvo genial, de qué es lo que venía después, o sea, cuándo era la próxima oportunidad para hacerlo en los meses siguientes. No contestaron, dijeron que tenían días todo el año, y ahí preguntó Manuel Masanti, que me encantó, las fechas exactas que podrían tener, y se ve que no las tenían adelante, entonces dijeron que se las mandaban por correo. Es interesante ver el estilo de estas conferencias de prensa gubernamentales versus las de las empresas privadas. Bueno, pero más o menos se manejan en el mismo sendero. Yo no he visto un gran cambio en eso. Daniel, muy bueno. El saludo primero en castellano, señalando la procedencia hispana, dice Alex Reto. Sí, hay que ponerlo en español, ya que es lo que hacemos, prensa latina, ¿no? Científica y espacial. Entonces, creo que, bueno, si no hablan español, que creo que lo deben de hablar la mayoría de ellos, es un buen momento para meter un poquito la cucharita, ¿no? Bueno, no esperábamos mucho más que esto, así que es interesante lo del retorque ese, o sea que tienen que volver a apretar un montón de cosas, donde hay válvulas, donde hay sellos, pero que es normal, obviamente. Esto es como cuando uno arma un motor de auto, que he armado y ayudado a mecánicos, que le ponen la tapa de los cilindros con su junta y hacen el aprete con torquímetro, o sea que se aprieta con determinada fuerza y determinado orden los tornillos para que apriete pareja. Y luego de que se aprieta, se le da una segunda apretada porque las juntas ceden. Inclusive hay vehículos en que después de ponerlos en marcha se les vuelve a apretar otra vez. Y esto es lo mismo, digo, no hay misterios, es mecánica, van con fluidos muy fríos, muy altas presiones, pero en definitiva es eso. Lo que sí es incomprensible que ya han tenido esos problemas y les preguntan, ¿no? ¿Cómo puede ser que una cosa que se supone que está funcionando con Air Liquid, el proveedor de nitrógeno, tiene que hacer una ampliación porque no les alcanza? Y ya han lanzado vehículos prácticamente del mismo porte, ¿no? Pero bueno, en fin, lo cierto es que las novedades no hay mucho más que estas. No tenemos mucho más para agregar. Quiero agradecer el apoyo de todos, obviamente. ¿Por qué me veo? O sea, me cambié ahora y estoy bajito, no sé por qué estoy tan bajo. Yo no me bajé en la silla, pero se ve que, no sé si la cámara se bajó o qué, que quedé como que estuviera sentado por allí abajo, no lo entiendo, pero bueno, lo estoy corrigiendo, a ver cómo queda. Ahí está, perfecto. Quiero contarles algo más, algo cortito, que no es del canal, pero sí es de un amigo del canal, Darien Hernández. Vamos a ponerlo ya, a ver si lo tenemos acá. No, lo buscamos en YouTube. Vamos a poner Explorando el Espacio. Explorando el Espacio. Este es el canal de Darien Hernández. Saben que tenemos una amistad bastante especial con él. Pero miren esto. Este es el canal de él. Cuando están suscriptos y entran y ven esto, 2 videos. Mañanero Espacial le llamó Darien. Empezó ayer a hacer un informativo cortito de 4 minutos con las noticias del día del mundo espacial. Es increíble. Está muy, muy bueno. Les pongo un poquito para que lo vean. Disculpen el volumen que está un poquito alto. Miren qué bueno que está.
La compañía española PLD Space realiza el ensayo estático número 2 de su cohete suborbital Miura 1 de manera exitosa. La compañía solo se encuentra a solo un test de la calificación de vehículo completo. Miura 1 se encuentra casi listo para lanzar, según publicaciones en su cuenta de Twitter. Un funcionario clave de la misión ExoMar de Europa cree...
Bueno, y así sigue, es rapidito, pasa un montón de noticias. La verdad que, mucha gente ya lo conoce a Darien, pero que quien no lo conoce, el canal de Explorando el Espacio realmente vale la pena. Vamos a ver si podemos poner a rodar los títulos, las despedidas como corresponden. Primero a los miembros VIP, el gran apoyo que nos dan, un abrazo enorme, gracias a los moderadores que nos están ayudando, como siempre, a hacer que este chat sea un chat accesible para todos. Gracias a los que se suscriben, a los que nos dan me gusta, gracias a los que comparten también en las redes sociales, sobre todo en WhatsApp, que nos traen mayor cantidad de gente al canal y así seguimos con esto y seguimos creciendo. Un abrazo enorme, enorme, enorme. ¿Me olvido de algo? A ver... cuando lo vi la primera vez pensé que cambió el tipo de divulgación. Claro, refiriéndose a Darien. Le vi el video de Darien, ya le felicité, dice Rosa Sierra. Hoy lo vi, dice Héctor también. Ya vemos los mañaneros de Darien, muy buenos, excelente para comenzar el día. Daniel, gracias por darnos la información. Rosana Chávez. Adrián Braga dice, tiene los informes Matamoros, ¿no? No entiendo cómo. ¿Cómo va el progreso de Artemis? Dice Javier Márquez. Es lo que estamos hablando. ¿Cómo va el progreso? ¿No? Recién a final de mes van a ir a hacer el nuevo ensayo previo al lanzamiento. Lo van a llevar de nuevo al sitio otra vez y no van a lanzar hasta agosto, finales de agosto como temprano. Así que, bueno, Héctor González dice, ¿dónde van? ¿Ya me dejan solo? No, todavía no, pero sí estamos finalizando. Quiero darles un abrazo, gracias enorme por el apoyo. Lo próximo que viene es Starlink, el lanzamiento en la madrugada de mañana, en la mañana muy temprano, a media mañana en España, de madrugada en América, así que bueno, a dormir apurados, como decía mi papá, hay que dormir apurados para poder levantarse en hora. Ahora los últimos mensajes. Adrián Braga, gracias Daniel por esta transmisión. Héctor González dice, no te olvides de Scotty, ¿no? Scotty está ahí esperando que le diga que me teletransporte. Y ya se lo pido, ¿sí? Scotty, por favor, teletranspórtame al Centro Espacial Kennedy, que quiero ir allí. Chao, un abrazo enorme, gracias a todos.